Hello everybody, welcome back to my latest recap video of the Nancy Drew games. Today I am looking at games 21 through 30. So for those of you who have not watched one of my recap games, I just go over groups of 10 games at a time. So my first one included games 1 through 10, the second one 11 through 20, and now this one 21 through 30. I do not include the dossier games as I am looking just at the adventure series. However, they do have a little recap video of their own. So the structure of my recaps is that I begin by just discussing the 10 games that are included in the recap. So just going over plots, characters, all that type of stuff. And then the main focus is I'm talking about my favorite elements from the games that we're covering in the recap. So that will include things such as my favorite character, my favorite villain, my favorite soundtrack, favorite lines, favorite moments. I also rank the games. So just really subjective things, sort of my opinions about things. And I'm hoping that you guys find that interesting and maybe feel sort of the same way or can share how you feel, whether it's the same or different. And then I always end with a special topic. Previous special topics have included dialogue and how that has evolved over the course of the series. The second special topic was storylines, so the books that the games are being based off of and how her interactive was making those choices. And then for this recap video, I'm going to talk about the adaptations of the stories. So how her interactive has adapted the games from their source material and how that has changed over the series. So before I dive in, I will of course give a spoiler alert, because as I've already noted, I'm going to talk to you about my favorite villain. So I'm going to be talking about, all the details. So be prepared for that. So first things first, just a quick recap of what games are included in this discussion. So again, that's 21 through 30. So number 21, Warnings at Waverly Academy. 22, Trail of the Twister. 23, Shadow at the Water's Edge. 24, The Captive Curse. 25, Alibi in Ashes. 26, Tomb of the Lost Queen. 27, The Deadly Device. 28, Ghost of Thornton Hall, 29, The Silent Spy, and finally number 30, The Shattered Medallion. So these are the main games I'm going to be talking about. The exception is going to come in with a special topic where that covers the entire series. But otherwise, for the purposes of this recap, these are the 10 games I will be talking about. So let's do a quick little recap of each game. So starting with 21, Warnings at Waverly Academy. So our plot here is that the valedictorian candidates at a private school have been targeted by a student referring to herself as the Black Cat. Nancy goes undercover as a transfer student to seek out the perpetrator. So from here I'm going to note the book that the story is based off of, which sometimes is more than one. In this case it is just a single title. It is from the Nancy Drew Digest paperback series, number 158, The Curse of the Black Cat. Our mystery in the story is pranks. And then I have a question. Treasure? Is there a treasure hunt involved? Yes, there is. It's not necessarily about gold or money, but it is something of value that is motivating our culprit, and Nancy might be looking for as well. Our setting is the next thing, so a private school. And then location, so the grander area in which the game takes place, in this case, New England. And our suspects, we have 5 and then 6. So we start off with just 5, and then a 6th one pops up closer to the end of the game. Our next one is number 22, Trail of the Twister. So a storm chasing team has experienced many accidents, and PG Krollmeister has asked Nancy to temporarily join the team to find out who has been sabotaging their efforts. The book this game is based off of is also digest paperback. It's actually 3 books before the last one. It's 155, The Mystery in Tornado Alley. The mystery here is sabotage. There is no treasure hunt. The setting is a farmhouse in the surrounding area. Location is Oklahoma, and we have 5 suspects. Game number 23, Shadow at the Water's Edge. Nancy's holidaying at a traditional ryokan in Kyoto, Japan, and she witnesses strange events, which appear to be hauntings. So snooping in the evening around the inn, Nancy uncovers who is faking the hauntings and why. The book that this game is based off of is a Nancy Drew and Hardy Boy Super Mystery. And I should note this is the original Super Mystery series, not the newer ones. It's number 12, Tour of Danger. We have 2 mysteries in this case, sabotage and hauntings. There's no treasure hunt in this game, although there is something sort of a value that Nancy finds, but it is not motivating her nor the culprit, so I don't consider it a treasure. Our setting is a traditional ryokan and the surrounding city. And location, Kyoto, Japan, and we have 4 suspects. Moving on to game number 24, The Captive Curse, Nancy's asked to investigate monster sightings and an old German castle. So this is a rather unique storyline. And while tracking down the beast, Nancy hears tales of other crimes perpetrated or said to be perpetrated by the monster over many, many years. So this is an interesting book. It's number 64, Captive Witness, which was originally published as a digest paperback, but reprinted as a hardcover. So I have noted both formats. Our mystery, as I said, it's unique. It's monster sightings. And then later on, there's also a bit of a kidnapping. There's no treasure, although, again, Nancy does find something rather valuable and important, but it's not our motivator. The setting is a castle in the surrounding forest. The location is Bavaria, Germany, and we have 4 suspects. Number 25, Alibi in Ashes. Our plot is that Nancy is framed for arson, and with help from her friends Ned, Bess, and George, the true fire setter is uncovered and arrested. So here we have a game that's based off of 2 titles. The first one is a case file, number 43, False Impressions, and the second one is a digest paperback. Her Interactive is a fan of using these books. It's number 163, The Clues Challenge. Our mystery is arson. We can even say, someone being framed for a crime, but essentially it's arson. There's no treasure hunt, even though part of what the game is about is the Clues Challenge, looking for this item. It's not part of our mystery, so no treasure here. The setting, a jail, that's sort of where we start off. Nancy's house and some of the other retail properties within the community of River Heights. And I've said 4 to 5 suspects. This is because we have 4 suspects who, Nancy and her friends are interrogating, but really Nancy's a suspect herself, so I've thrown her in as number 5. Next is number 26, Tomb of the Lost Queen. Nancy helps an archaeological team search for the tomb of Queen Nefertari. When a researcher is injured, Nancy also looks into who could be sabotaging the dig. So we are back to the Nancy Drew and Hardy Boys Super Mysteries. Again, this is from the original series. It's number 25, Secrets of the Nile. And we have 2 mysteries here, sabotage and a little bit of theft. This game, yes, there is a treasure. It's not necessarily gold, but it is not just what Nancy and the team are looking for as part of the original storyline, but it also is the motivator for a culprit. What is going to come out of finding Queen Nefertari's tomb and the glory that comes from that. So I do consider there to be a treasure in this game. Our setting is a dig site located in Egypt, and again we have 4 suspects. Game number 27, The Deadly Device. Our plot is that Nancy is hired to look into the suspected murder of a physicist. She stays at the research facility to interview suspects and analyze the crime scene. And once again, this is based off of 2 stories. So the first is Nancy Drew on Campus. This is the first and only time we have a book from this series used as our source material. It's number 22, In and Out of Love. And then our second one is, of course, a paperback, number 165, The Crime Lab Case. Our mystery is murder. There is a treasure of sorts. So in this case, it is looking for research, this information, and that's actually going to lead to fame, glory, and a whole lot of moolah. So yes, I do consider there to be a treasure in this. Our setting is the Technology of Tomorrow Today office. The location is Colorado. And suspects, again, 4 to 5. We start off with the 4 physical suspects who we see, and then our 5th one turns up toward the end of the game. Then we have Ghost of Thornton Hall. It's game number 28. Nancy's called in to help locate a missing bride-to-be. Nancy experiences moments of dizziness and sees what she believes to be the ghostly figure of Charlotte Thornton on multiple occasions. The book that this game is based off of is the Nancy Drew Girl Detective novel number 10, Uncivil Acts, and it is the first time a girl detective novel has been used as source material. Our mystery is initially a disappearance, but also these supposed hauntings. There is no treasure in this game. The setting is a dilapidated house on an island. The location is the state of Georgia. And suspects, again, 4 to 5. This is because initially we have a certain number, that's 4. And then 5th, we find our missing bride-to-be, and we can kind of consider her a suspect because did she make herself disappear? So that's why it's 4 to 5. So second to last, number 29, The Silent Spy. The plot here is that Nancy is tricked into traveling to Scotland to learn the truth about her mother's past and death. While there, she has to make tough decisions to help prevent a bioterrorist attack. So we are now looking at a hardcover, number 41, The Clue of the Whistling Bagpipes. Our mystery is terrorism, so this is unique. We don't see this in other games. There's no treasure involved. The setting is a spy headquarters primarily, as well as a safe house and then the city. And we have a few different locations within Scotland, primarily Edinburgh, as well as Loch Lomond and Bearsden. And we have 4 suspects. And then the last game we're looking at is number 30, The Shattered Medallion. Our plot here is that Nancy and George participate in a reality television series. After an incident in which George becomes injured, Nancy looks into sabotage and why Sunny June has taken over the show. And we are back to the Girl Detective series. We're looking at the super mystery, number 3 from the series, Real Fake. Our mystery is sabotage. We could even say, what's Sunny up to? We could say that's part of a mystery, but I'm just going to stick with sabotage. And there is a treasure. And this ties back to Sunny. Why is Sunny here? But also, just the reward and fame and glory for our actual culprit. The setting is base camp and various outdoor sites that the participants go to. And our location is the South Island of New Zealand with 4 suspects. So there's a quick breakdown of each of the games, and then I'm just going to do further breakdowns that sort of summarize everything from all of them. So half of these games take place overseas, so very similar to the last batch in which I'd said half the games take place in North America. So same sort of deal here, half the games take place overseas. And then breaking down the physical characters. And this is different from suspects. I am considering Bess and George as well. Like, who did her interactive take the time to create physically? So 3 of the 10 games include 4 physical characters, which is quite different from the first 10 games in which we saw 8 games having 4 physical characters. Our second batch of games was actually like this. We had only 3 games in which there were 4 physical characters. So that's really evolved over the years. 4 of the 10 games include 5 physical characters, which is the same, again, as the last one. The last batch of 10 games also included 4 games with 5 physical characters, whereas the first 10 games we had 1 game that had 5. And then we have 2 games that have 6 physical characters and 1 game that has 7. Again, Nancy's friends, Bess and George, are included in this count. And number 7, or the 7 physical characters, I should say, that's Alibi and Ashes. We've got 4 suspects, we've got Bess and George, and we also have Chief McGinnis. So if anyone is wondering how I got to 7, that's how. That's why there's 1 game with 7. And then let's break down the books. So we have 1 game from this set of 10 that's based off of a Nancy Drew case file. 2 are based off of Nancy Drew and Hardy Boys Super Mysteries, both of the original series. 5 games are based off of digest paperbacks and 2 based off of hardcovers. This is a little misleading because, again, with the Captive Curse, that book, Captive Witness, was both published as a paperback and then a hardcover. I've actually tallied it in both, so this is misleading, but so it goes. 1 game is based off of a Nancy Drew on Campus book, and 2 based off of Girl Detective. So 1 sort of the original regular series, 1 is the super mystery. And these totals are not going to add up to 10. It's going to be more, partly because of cheating with Captive Witness, being both a hardcover and paperback for a single story, but also we've got 2 games that are based off of more than 1 story, so hence why our tallies are bigger. And basically recapping what I just said, we've got 2 of these 10 games that are based off of 2 stories, whereas the remaining 8 are just based off of a single story. And time to break down those mysteries. So we've got 1 where the mystery is murder. 2 of these 10 games have a mystery involving hauntings. 1 of the 10 involves monster sightings. That's the Captive Curse. 4 of the 10 games involve sabotage. That is a pretty common theme. 1 of these 10 games involves pranks. 1 includes arson. 1 is about theft, or it includes it. 2 of the 10 mysteries involve a disappearance. So that's going to be missing bride-to-be from Ghost of Thornton Hall. But I've also included our kidnapping at the end of the Captive Curse in here as well. And then we have 1 where our mystery involves terrorism. So we've got a decent spread. And then finally, just that treasure hunt tally, 4 of the 10 games involve a treasure hunt. And that's really changed too. In our first 10 games, 6 of the 10 involve treasure hunts. And same with the next 10. 11 through 20, also 6 of those 10 involved a treasure hunt of some form or another. Yeah, so I always think this is interesting just to see, how the breakdown is, but also to compare to the other ones, how things have evolved and shifted over the years. All right, so we just have a little bit more of the dry stuff. I still find it interesting. That's why I put it in here. But we'll get to my favorites and me getting a little bit more excited shortly. So first, let's go over educational elements. I just point out what we're learning in each of the games. So Warnings at Waverly Academy, we learn a little bit about Edgar Allan Poe. We learn a bit about piano notes. This is very common throughout the whole series, and this is not the first, or not the only time we're going to see it in this list. It is the first time. And then some Roman numerals being involved. For Trail of the Twister, we're obviously learning about weather systems, the Fujita scale, and there's a little bit of math. So when we have to buy supplies at Pa's grocery store, we get to do some math. Shadow at the Water's Edge, obviously learning about Japanese culture. We think about those lessons we take with Takai. Just having a whole bunch of number puzzles, and to me that is still educational, being able to work things out, sort of like logic puzzles. And then we sort of touch on English grammar. Part of why Nazis in Japan is to teach English. We don't really get a whole lot of information. We don't get graded on our work, but it is involved or incorporated. The Captive Curse, we've got German language, of course, thinking about what we see in the newspaper articles and using words there that we have to translate and decode or use for decoding. And then again, musical notes. Like I said, we were going to see this more than once, and this is with regard to the Glockenspiel. Next, Alibi and Ashes, we learn a little bit about accelerants and also about gathering fingerprints, how to do that correctly. For Tomb of the Lost Queen, obviously Egyptology, that is our main thing we're learning there, and a little bit about hieroglyphics. We're not learning quite true. It's simplified. It's a little too easy in the game, but we sort of get an idea of hieroglyphs and what they look like. The Deadly Device, obviously physics. We're at the Science Center. That is primarily about physics. There's also a little bit of chemistry thrown in there. And once again, musical notation. Think about that musical Tesla coil. So, such a common theme or educational element. For Ghost of Thornton Hall, we learn a little bit about electricity. This is at the very beginning when we need to charge a phone, but we don't have any power in the house. So we learn about how citrus and copper can come together to charge a phone. We also learn about the effects of carbon monoxide poisoning. Not until the end of the game, but it is important. And then they touch on the American Civil War as well. For The Silent Spy, we have bagpipes and, of course, musical notes. Because why wouldn't we have musical notes? And then we learn a bit more Scottish stuff, and this is in terms of family tartans. And then finally, for the Shattered Medallion, we learn a little bit about New Zealand flora. This is with regard to, I think it's the second task that Nancy and the other participants are working on, picking some of these plants. There's also a little bit about Maori vocabulary, although not the pronunciation, which I think is a missed opportunity. And then turtle. We learn a little bit about the leatherback turtle. So the last thing to talk about before we get into my favorites are the game locations I visited. So once again, I'm just copying the same text from the very first recap because I don't see a need to change this. I am a keen traveler. I love to travel, and I so enjoy pointing out the locations in not just games, but TV shows and films where I have been. I always think that's really exciting. So I'm going to do it here as well. So Warnings at Waverly Academy set in New England. We don't specify the state, but I've been to a few of the states within New England. So that is a yes. Next, we have Trail of the Twister set in Oklahoma. No, I have not been there. Shadow at the Water's Edge, Japan. Yes, I have spent a little bit of time there. It's quite a long time ago now. The Captive Curse set in Germany. Yes, I was there as well. Spent a good chunk of a summer there and will hopefully be there again next summer. For Alibi and Ashes, we don't, again, have a specific state. We're just the American Midwest. This is because we don't know where River Heights is located. And I had to write this for Secret of the Old Clock as well. But I haven't been to any of the states that fall within that region, so I can just say no. For Tomb of the Lost Queen set in Egypt, no, I've not been there, but I would like to go. The Deadly Device, Colorado, not the first time that game has been set there, so just like before, that is a yes. For Ghost of Thornton Hall, set in the state of Georgia, no, I've not been there. The Silent Spy, Scotland, yes, I have been to that country. And the Shattered Medallion, set in New Zealand, yes, I have been there as well. So that's a total of 6 locations from these 10 games that I have been to. And so that's bumping up a little bit. In our first 10, I'd been to 3 of the 10 locations. And for the next batch, it was half. So now we're up to 6 out of these 10. So that to me is just really cool. I like to see how that tally goes up, and I knew it would. So now we can start talking about my favorites. So again, this is very subjective. This is just what's favorite or favorite things for me. They might not be true for everyone else. I'm sure they won't be. I expect some overlap, but to me, I just am excited to talk about the things that I love so much. So I'm going to start by ranking the games worst to best. And again, this is just these 10 games, 21 through 30. Some of these, and not very many, but some are fairly consistently in the position that I'm going to rank them here. Others are a little bit more fluid. But our first one that's fairly consistent, number 10, The Silent Spy. Least favorite game, not just of this batch of games, but possibly the entire series. I just don't enjoy this game. Following this, Trail of the Twister. This was my least favorite game for many years until The Silent Spy. So enough said there. And then number 8, The Shattered Medallion. There are things about this game that I do enjoy, but the Sunny June stuff, that storyline is just unbelievable to me. I just can't deal with it. So that's why it's ranked fairly low. Then we have The Captive Curse. So 7, 6, and 5, there's a bit of fluidity here, but I think for the most part, this is where I would rate The Captive Curse. Number 7, it has some of the best dialogue. It's really funny. Some great characters. I think Lucas is hysterical, but I just don't buy the storyline. I don't think it's believable. These repeated sightings of a monster and the fact that it takes place over a single night really bothers me. So it is a game that, for the most part, doesn't actually work for me. Following this is Tomb of the Lost Queen. It's a unique storyline, and I'm really amazed by the location and the artistry of it, but it has a very weak ending. I don't like the ending, so that's why it's sort of ranked in the second half here and toward the middle of these games. And number 5, Alibi and Ashes. Similarly, not a storyline I particularly enjoy. I do like that it's sort of light and bright, but I don't like the storyline. I don't like not being Nancy all the time. I also don't believe the culprit. It just doesn't work for me. So number 4, this is actually probably fairly stable being in this position. Ghost of Thornton Hall. I do like parts of it, others I don't. I just felt that was very dark, and the time of its release didn't quite fit for me. I felt like it should have been released a little bit later because we'd already had a few sort of dark games in terms of theme, but also aesthetics. So that really threw me off. But it does have some really good puzzles. But also how the hauntings are set up, I just don't buy that. So that's why it's in the middle, but I do like it better than Alibi and Ashes, Tomb of the Lost Queen, and The Captive Curse. I'm fairly firm on that. Number 3, love this game, Shadow at the Water's Edge. I love the setting, I love the music, I love the story. I do not love Nancy's attitude. I do think she's tactless, really inconsiderate. So that is my big problem with this game. But otherwise, I love the storyline. I love everything else about it. Number 2, The Deadly Device. Like, it's amazing that this is not in first place, and the only reason it's not in first place is because of the game that is in first place. That is a clear winner. But I love this game, which is astounding because I went into this game the first time I played it thinking it was going to be awful. I thought it was going to be Trail of the Twister 2.0. And I was so glad to be wrong. I really like the storyline. I really like the characters. The soundtrack is phenomenal, and I think it's just a very well put together game. And number 1, Warnings at Waverly Academy. I love this game. This is a game I will play quite often. I really like the setting. I like the diversity of the characters, and I really appreciate the motivation of the culprit. I don't agree with what they've done, but I think it's fitting and it's delivered really well. So there's my ranking, worst to best of games 21 through 30. Now let's talk about favorite characters. So I'm just going to list each of the games and say who my favorite character is from each game. And I'm going to do an overall favorite character from the 10 and end with who my favorite culprit is. So for Warnings at Waverly Academy, Mel Corvallis. She's fantastic. She's really funny, but I also really appreciate her backstory, and she's a little different from everybody else, and she doesn't want people to think that she's too soft. She's got a reputation that she wants to uphold, even though it makes her a little different. She stands out. But at the same time, she wants to be part of the school. She wants to feel involved and liked and, part of something. So I really appreciate her character. For Trail of the Twister, Debbie Kirkham, I just really like her attitude and how upbeat she is. That's always really stood out to me. A close second is Pa. A very different character. He's got a very tragic story to him. But Debbie is actually my favorite. For Shadow at the Water's Edge, hands down Rentaro. He's hysterical. He also delivers some really wise words. But yeah, he just kept me engaged. I just thought he was really entertaining. For the Captive Curse, Lucas, easy pick. He's just so funny. He brings so much life to the castle when everything else is dark and, they're having a really low time. But he's constantly pulling these pranks. I think he's just so sweet and funny. But also you kind of want to look out for him because he's a little bit different. He doesn't have a whole lot of friends. He's living in this big castle as the only kid. It's kind of sad, but he warms my heart. Special mention though, Marcus Bohm. So these are obviously physical characters I'm talking about, but as a phone contact, I have to talk about Marcus. He is so funny. He just delivers some of the best lines. They're so unexpected, and to me, so fitting for his character and where the game is set. To me, it's just so right. So I had to mention Marcus as well. So moving on to Alibi and Ashes, Deirdre Shannon, who is not one of my favorite characters as far as the book series goes. I really dislike her in the books. However, her interactive brought her to life in such a magnificent way. I think she's so funny and her attitude is delivered so well. Even though I don't like that attitude, it fits. It really works very well for her. And she kept me entertained in that game. Next, we have Tomb of the Lost Queen. This is sort of hard because I don't like the characters from this game. I find them all really irritating. I don't like the way they express themselves. Lily is sort of an exception to that, and I think her backstory is more interesting than the others, and what motivates her to help out the culprit, and how she got put in that position or how she arrived there. So that's why I've selected Lily for Tomb of the Lost Queen. Deadly Device, sort of the opposite of Tomb of the Lost Queen. I love all the characters, even the ones who I wouldn't get along with, like Mason, and even Victor, who's just not very nice, but I think he's delivered so well. But Ryan just really stole the show for me. Her attitude, she's upbeat, she's hysterical, and with her love of gummy bears and her response to the mayor of Nightmare Town, that robotic cat that Mason keeps freaking her out with, but also her position in the game, being a prime suspect and, trying to figure out, is she guilty or is she actually innocent? And just working with Ryan, I think, was really interesting. But I do have to do another honorable mention here. Deirdre Shannon as phone contact. To me, it doesn't make sense that she's a phone contact. I think that's important to say, but she was fantastic. She had some particularly amazing lines, so I had to throw in Deirdre here as well. Continuing on for Ghost of Thornton Hall, Wade Thornton. I really appreciated Wade and how reflective he is, and he really questions things and puts into perspective the family and their actions, and who does he want to be, what legacy does he want to leave behind, and really struggling with whether or not he's a good person or not. And I think that makes him kind of stand out. He's really special and unique in that way. And he's a good balance to some of the other characters who are either really stubborn, very different, or, questioning themselves, but in more of a negative way. I'm thinking of Colton here, who's rather depressive. So I appreciate Wade from this game. And then Silent Spy, this is another game where I don't like the characters. Alec is the only one I had any patience for. I especially like listening to him when Nancy's sort of eavesdropping on the bug she's planted and just talking to himself, all that chatter she's listening to. So yeah, he's the only character from this game that I actually like. So sort of an easy pick, but also, he's not amazing. It's just he's the only one I could tolerate. And then finally, this was a tougher one, Shattered Medallion. Kiri I really liked, and I was sort of torn between her and Patrick, just because of Patrick's depth, and he's got some really funny lines, like when he's saying, "Oh, were you saying help?" Just some unexpected lines, which made me kind of fall in love with him. And then even Sunny, if Sunny wasn't Sunny June, then he might have been placed here, but I've gone with Kiri, just because of her backstory. It's not entirely unique, but it's also different in terms of her history with reality television. So that's sort of why I've picked Kiri here, but a close second would have been Patrick. So overall, who is my favorite character from these 10 games? It is Ryan from The Deadly Device. I just really appreciate her character. She's got this story. She was trying to do the right thing and trying to be helpful, but having all this worry and, that we had a death as a result. And she's this prime suspect. She's framed, but she really wants to help. She wants to do good things. And she's also so funny. Her reactions when trying to help Nancy with distracting Victor. Just fantastic. So she is my favorite, but this is a tough call too, because there are so many great characters. I think of Rentaro and Mel. Also, they really just steal the show in their games, and even Deirdre. So tough pick, but I did go with Ryan. And then as far as favorite villain, Corrine. So she's not even mentioned as a favorite character, and that's because Mel is absolutely my favorite character from Warnings at Waverly Academy, but a close second is Corrine. She is my favorite villain. Again, I just really appreciate what her story is, that her motivation and her delivery of her lines. You know, it's not necessarily that she's cold and calculating, but she's very serious, she's very factual, but she also comes off as being really lonely, so she's got a depth to her that I really appreciate. But I think she's calculating in a way that sort of works for a teen, and is sort of brilliant too. Just shows how smart she is. So yeah, Corrine is my favorite villain from games 21 through 30. So moving on from characters, let's talk about cover art. And I think this is so important to talk about, because to me that's what first draws you in. If you're not following the updates and you don't see, say, screenshots or hear what the details are about the game, the cover art is really your first introduction. If you're wandering a store and you see it, it's what's going to pull you in. It's what's making you curious. So I love talking about the cover art. So I'm going to talk about 3 of them. The first one, Warnings at Waverly Academy. There is a subtlety to this cover art that I really appreciate. So we start off by sort of noting our building here. That's our focal point. You can tell it's an older building. It's made of brick. We don't see a whole lot of that here, at least. But to me, that indicates that this is an old, maybe revered building that's got some history. And we've got the school emblem. But we're not just seeing the emblem, we see these claw marks through it. And this is part of the signature of our culprit, the black cat. They're signing off their notes with, paw print and these scratch marks. So we have that involved in our cover art. And then if we look at the bottom, just beneath the title, we see a black cat just walking across the path. It's not the focal point, but it's still included, and it is who our culprit is inspired by, is this black cat. So there's just something about how this is woven together without being glaring. It's not actually in your face, even though the emblem really stands out. I still feel like it's very subtle, and it's almost warm. It draws me in. And on top of all that, I just love the color scheme. I think it's very different from the other box art up to this point. I just think it's very pretty. It catches my eye. The second one is Alibi and Ashes. And the thing that I really want to talk about is how this cover art tells you the story of the game. It gives you the plot right off the bat. I mean, there's some guesswork with the other one. You don't know that it's about, a school. I mean, without looking at the text on the box, you don't know that it's threats to these valedictorian candidates. You look at Alibi and Ashes, and it's very clear what our story is about. We have the River Heights Town Hall. It's on fire, so we know we're looking into something to do with a burning building. And we look at the corners, and we've got Nancy. We don't see her face, but we see her name. She's holding that board, so we know she's in jail. And then we have her friends opposite, so this is her support system who are going to help her out. So we quite clearly know what's happening here. There's been a fire, Nancy's in trouble, and her friends are going to help her out. So that's what's always stood out to me about this cover, is just the way it immediately lets us know what our mystery is. And I also want to point out, I just love the note at the top, that banner, special 25th edition. Yeah, I think that's just a great thing to note and to highlight, really. So then we've got one more, Tomb of the Lost Queen. As I've already noted, it's not one of my favorite games. However, it is one of my favorite box art. It draws me in every time. I remember when it was first released, and I was absolutely captivated by it. Really stunned by how magnificent it is. And the first thing that stood out is that it's almost like we're confronted with this figure on the front. And this is the beginning of when we see that with the box art, where the focal point is quite often an individual. It's not the first time we see it. We think of the Haunting of Castle Malloy, and we've got the Banshee sort of flying across the front. But to me, this just really stands out. She's very almost in your face. She's right front and center, it's like she's bold and just being in the front. And having her depicted in two ways, we have one half of her where what she might look like in life, and she's got this beauty and even sort of this, it's almost like a headdress around her to indicate her status. The other half of her, which is not alive, she's been mummified, and we see her holding this relic, and she's she is a part of history now. So that, I think, is just so beautifully done. And then we look at other details. So we've got the serpent in the background, and we do have a snake come into play. On the opposite side, we have a beetle crawling up the sarcophagus. We do have a little puzzle that involves a beetle. And I mean, dung beetles, that with Egypt is just, that's part of what it is. You associate the two. And then again, looking at the bottom, beneath the title, where we just get a little glimpse of this desert scene where we've got the dig site and the tents. And I think that just perfectly captures our scenery, even though we don't see it a lot and it's not in the forefront. It's not the main thing we're looking at in the cover. It still helps to set the scene and gets you ready for this adventure. So I love the cover art for Tomb of the Lost Queen. It's just such a standout. Okay, let's continue on with some of my favorite lines, and these were really hard to break down or to choose only 3. These 10 games have some of the funniest bits of dialogue, and it was just so hard not to go on and on and on. And as with my other recaps, I'm only picking 3 bits of favorite lines, and I've opted to do 2. I don't really want to say that they're more serious, but they're wise. They're not funny lines, because they stood out to me at the time, and I think about them often. They've actually had an impact, and I think they're very important lines. And then the last one is a funny line I've chosen. So I'm going to start with, "A ghost doesn't need to be real to haunt you." So Rentaro says this in Shadow at the Water's Edge, and I think that's so true. It's important to reflect on this line, I think. And we don't have to believe in ghosts, or ghosts don't need to be real for them to have an impact. And that could be about guilt and or your actions or just fears. Anything can stick with you and impact your feelings and your thoughts, create some anxiety and worries, and drive your behavior. So I think this is a very interesting line, a very true line. Next is from Renata in The Captive Curse. "A knight in shining armor never did nothing for nobody. He never fought. A knight in dented, scraped armor. Now that's what you want. You want a knight in shining armor? Go see Carl." I think this is so wise. You think of storybooks for kids, and the hero is this knight in shining armor, but no, he hasn't done anything. This is so true. How do you know he's going to help? A knight in shining armor is someone who's stayed inside. He's not actually taking action. Whereas the knight in dented, scraped armor, he's proven himself. He doesn't just say words, but he acts. He does what needs to be done. So I really like that. And then there's the dig of Carl, which I debated whether or not to include, but I do think that just added some lightness to the quote. So then, as far as funny lines, so many to pick from. There's Mel has a great delivery of a funny line in Warnings at Waverly Academy. The Deadly Device is full of them. Between Ryan and Deirdre, you're just in stitches. Captive Curse as well. Pretty much anything that Marcus says. A lot of what Lucas and Carl say about one another. That's also funny. And I mentioned earlier from Shattered Medallion, Patrick has some funny dialogue. So trying to pick one was really difficult because, as I've said, there's so many of my favorite lines to choose from. But I've picked one from the Shattered Medallion. It is perhaps not the kindest line, but to me it stood out because, in part, I haven't played this game often, but it was so unexpected. But it's so true. It's kind of mean, but given the point of the game in which this comes up, you understand it. So it's 2 pieces of dialogue. Start with Nancy, who says, "What does turtle mean?" To which Sunny responds, "What? Maybe you should ask Patrick that." And this just had me in stitches. Like, it's such a dig on Patrick. But it's so funny because you understand that people think that Patrick is maybe not all that bright, which is not true. I mean, he really is quite wise. As Lena says, there's a depth to him. It's just not all that obvious. But you understand why Sunny says this, because Patrick comes off as not being, the brightest bulb in the box. So not very nice, but it made me laugh. So that's what I've thrown in here. So now let's quickly go over favorite soundtracks. These games have amazing music. And this is true for the whole series, so I'm just picking out a few here. So starting with Warnings at Waverly Academy, I really, really love this music. It makes me feel like I'm a detective. There's something about sort of the lightness of it, and I feel like it really captures the idea of stealth and sneaking around and trying to figure out what's going on. It just captures that feeling really well. And then we've got some lighter music and some classical music too, which I think is integrated really well and just very appropriate for the story. Next up is Shadow at the Water's Edge. I love this soundtrack. I used to listen to this all the time at one of my old jobs, particularly the music that plays when you're in the city and at the pachinko parlor. It's just so upbeat, it just makes you feel really great. I love it. And then you do have some of these softer tones when you're at the Ryokan, and then it also gets a little bit darker. And it just feels authentic. And it fits not just with the storyline and our mystery, but also with our setting. So that's one of the things I appreciate most about this soundtrack is how suitable it is for our game set in Japan. And then finally, The Deadly Device. Absolutely love the soundtrack. It is one of my all-time favorite soundtracks. I don't even know where to rank it. It's probably within the top 3 or 4. It drew me in immediately. I remember just being completely awed by it. I was really not looking forward to playing this game. I was very hesitant about what it was going to be about and how it was going to go. And I remember opening it up and being hit with this music. And I was like, whoa, oh my, okay. This has got something. This is great. And just being so intrigued and enthralled just by the music. And this really goes to say, too, how powerful a soundtrack is, the impact it has, and its role within a story and telling a story and making you feel comfortable in the space. So I thought I should note that as well. So let's continue on. We're now going to talk about puzzles and activities. So with these, there might be some overlap with a couple games. Some of them are going to be specific to a particular game or particular moment. And I've lumped puzzles and activities together because I don't think it's worth having separate slides for them. So I'm actually going to start with an activity, and this is Snooping at Night in Warnings at Waverly Academy. And you throw in that music that I mentioned before where it's sort of light, sort of tapping, you feel like you're on your tiptoes. It fits so well, particularly with this activity, Snooping at Night. And we do some investigating at night in some of the other games in this batch of 10, but to me it's not quite snooping. It's not as sneaky. You're not worried about stealth quite so much as you are with Warnings at Waverly Academy. And I really like that we're trying to get into this classroom. But before that, we have to get out of our room, not wake up our roommate, and not get caught by Paige, because depending on the route you take, she might hear you, she might look for you, and you have to hide. So I really appreciate this activity, and it really helps make me feel like a detective. So that's one of my favorite activities, without a doubt. Next are what I'm just going to call numbered grid puzzles, because this covers a bunch of different things. And a great example are all the puzzles from Shadow at the Water's Edge, and that's what I have a picture of here is notograms. Love notograms. I was introduced to them by this game, and I love them to this day. But we also have Sudoku and renograms. So that's coming from Shadow at the Water's Edge. But then we've got a few more games that include similar style puzzles. So Ghost of Thornton Hall, we have 2 instances of a puzzle where we've got numbers and colors and following these clues from a grid. And the Shattered Medallion, the spaceship puzzle, very similar, more so to the one from Ghost of Thornton Hall. You have to fit in these spaceships based on the rules, these number rules on the axes of the grid. So I love number puzzles no matter what. So that was a very easy pick for me. And then we've got Swap-A-Lot. So this is specific to Alibi and Ashes. I just think this is fun. It's fairly easy. You've got all the letters you need and they're in their columns. You just have to swap things. So there's a simplicity to it. I just think it's a nice way to pass the time. And I also love that this is a nod to the whole series because the answers are quotes from the other games. I just think that's beautiful. I love that idea that Her Interactive came up with to include them and celebrate the other games in this wonderful way. And then lastly, deciphering the hieroglyphs from Tomb of the Lost Queen. As I noted before, it may not be all that realistic. It's very simplified, but I like that we really have to use our brain and try and figure out how a single symbol could be a specific letter. Well, again, that may not be true in real life, but I like that decoding aspect. and usually starting with the word the. Look for those, a lump of three, start with the or and. That's a good way to get you started. Similarly, actually, with Swap a Lot, if you look at the picture here, the is the one word that I've uncovered first. So those are the favorite puzzles and activities that I wanted to point out. So next in my favorites, this is my favorite moment. And, I remember just the other day I was trying to figure out what am I going to pick for this, because I didn't have one that immediately sprung to mind, and I called my sister. And as soon as I started talking about it, I suddenly was like, oh, obviously my favorite moment is this hysterical moment, and asked my sister, do you know what moment I'm thinking of? She knew immediately what it was. So I am sure I'm not the only person who loves this moment. Whether or not it's their favorite from the set of 10, who knows? But I wouldn't be surprised if others share their opinion about this. So my favorite moment, Mel's reaction when Corinne and Nancy enter through the wall. This just gets me every time. I love her reaction, her dialogue, the delivery. I also just love that it's a cutscene that we get to watch. I think that's also very unique and really helps round out this game. But it's just so funny. So Nancy who sort of followed Corinne and interrupts the scene. We've got we've got Mel who's sort of freaking out and saying, no, forget it. You're not going anywhere until you tell me what the heck is going on. Corinne talks a little bit, and then Mel firmly stands her ground and says, you just entered my room through the wall. I want an explanation. Fair enough. And then Corinne talks again, and then Nancy suddenly appears, and Mel's just completely gobsmacked and says, you too? What is this? Like, just the dialogue is perfect for a teen. The delivery is fantastic. It's very Mel. It fits with her character. I love this moment. I just think it's perfect. It's so good. And it's one of the many reasons why Warnings at Waverly Academy is my favorite game from this batch of 10. So I hope other people appreciate this moment as much as I do. I almost don't want to move on, but I will. So we're going to talk about favorite storylines. Not going into too much detail, but I've got 4 that I'm just going to note and sort of explain why. So we'll start with, again, Warnings at Waverly Academy. Favorite game of this batch, has a great storyline. Not the first time that we're at a school, but again, sort of the motivation, who our culprit is. I also love the integration of Edgar Allan Poe. I think he's fascinating. He's my birthday buddy. But I think that's really lovely. And yeah, really what's driving Corinne and what she does. And when she's confronted, just her behavior and her calmness and the way she looks at Nancy and her stealth is just really enthralling to me. And yeah, and really this focus as well about doing well in your studies and this drive, not just for the idea of being a good student and for doing well, but the positive outcomes that can come from that as well, and this desire to further their education and to get this scholarship, I just think is a really great story. I think that's, it's a positive message. It's not to belittle anyone who doesn't do well or who doesn't want to pursue post-secondary education, but it's still celebrating the education system and what you can achieve by doing well. So I just really like that. A second one, Shout at the Water's Edge. The thing about this game is it's not our first spooky game, but to me, her interactive amped it up. There is a switch with this spooky game. It is on a whole other level than the previous ones, and it stands out. And to me, like, this is the first time I really felt spooked and uncomfortable. So it's just put together so well, plus throwing in the music and then this family storyline, which is quite sad, but is important. It's what drives our characters, and it's also what separates some of our characters. So I think that's very interesting. So very, very good storyline. I really enjoy it. Third one, Tomb of the Lost Queen. Again, not one of my favorite games. But the reason I put this on my list of favorite storylines is because of how unique it is. And I mean, all the games for the most part are different. They're not carbon copies of each other. And I've said that before in other videos. But this one to me really stands out. We haven't been to another dig site, and you don't really expect that to come up with the other games. And anyway, so I think that's really interesting. And then we think about, the motivation of, the glory of finding the site and having a bit of a historical aspect too. But also thinking about who our culprits are and why they do what they do. Especially Lily and her storyline as part of the bigger storyline, I think is really important. And then the last one, Deadly Device. Again, a game I thought was going to be terrible. I love this game. I love the storyline. I really like the idea of being in a single location. Those are always my favorite games. And looking into a murder, but not just looking into it, but being led to a certain suspect, having an idea of who's our prime suspect, who is most likely to have been behind this murder, and learning about that person's involvement and having tried to do the right thing, as well as the storylines of the other characters. Ellie, Mason, and Gray, I think they're all very interesting in addition to Ryan. And then throw in Victor and his motivation. I just think the story is so well told. Plus just the space is amazing, and throw in the music and, Bob's Your Uncle. This is a fantastic game. And then sort of similar to this, I want to talk about book to game adaptations, because I think this is really important too, noting, the source material and how Her Interactive has interpreted it. And I look at this in two ways, and I had a hard time with both of these for games 21 through 30. I normally can come up with a couple answers. I struggled to find one for each of the two. So let's look at the first thing. So this is my favorite book to game adaptation in terms of the best stories. So both the best novel, that storyline, as well as the game storyline, and the two being similar. So the game being very similar to its, outstanding source material. So I picked Warnings at Waverly Academy. This game certainly follows the storyline very well. I mean, there are some adaptations, of course, some changes, as Her Interactive often does, to make it suitable for a game and to tell a really compelling story. So this is a standout. Definitely my favorite adaptation as far as being a great storyline and closely following the novel. I don't really want to say an honorable mention, but I think it's important to note that there are some other book to game adaptations where Her Interactive has followed the storyline fairly well, but they're not storylines that interest me. So the first example is Alibi and Ashes. It's based off of False Impressions and the Clues Challenge, and Her Interactive, picked bits out of each of those and integrated them really well, but I just don't like the story. And then same with The Shattered Medallion. It's, it's sort of similar, changed a bit, but again, it's not an interesting story, and that's actually going to come up again in my next point. So the next thing I look at is my favorite book to game adaptation in terms of improvement to the source material. So Shattered Medallion, again, not an honorable mention, but kind of, again, it's not a story I really like, but Her Interactive did, I think, improve the storyline in part. I don't like the Sunny stuff, but how they adapted the storyline to be more outdoor setting for a mystery. I thought that was really good. But the one story I did pick with difficulty was The Deadly Device. And the reason I say this is with difficulty is because I've stated that it's an improvement. So this game is based off of two books, In and Out of Love, which hardly counts, and The Crime Lab Case. And The Crime Lab Case is a fantastic story. I know a lot of people really enjoy this novel. And then The Deadly Device, also fantastic story. The reason it's not in the first category, best stories, in terms of most similar to source material, is because the source material, although it is about sort of a science-based mystery, it's very different. So it doesn't quite fit under that category, and I don't even really like to say it's an improvement because I think that's a really great story, The Crime Lab Case. It's set up as like a crime lab camp for students to solve a mystery, a chemistry-related mystery, which I think would have been stellar had it been written on its own or the game created to follow that story more. But what Her Interactive did for their adaptations and changes to that story is phenomenal. So I've squeaked it into this category of in terms of improvement to the source material. It's a bit of a fib because I think that the original source material is fantastic, but the changes they made were fantastic as well. So we're nearly through my favorites. I just want to touch on favorite locations and my favorite room as well. So locations, this is sort of broadly speaking, just the entire area where a game takes place. So I'll start off with Shadow at the Water's Edge. I just love that setting in Japan. It's just so comfortable, and throw in again the music that really helps set the setting. I just love that we had a game set in Japan. I think that was so great, and as well as the different places that Nancy goes to. I love the look of the ryokan. I particularly love the garden in the back, but also the pachinko parlor I think is great. Next we have the Shattered Medallion. Again, not a game I really enjoy, but I love New Zealand. I love how this whole thing was set up. I love the environment. I love that it's focused on the outdoors, and I think it was depicted really beautifully, especially at Doubtful Sound. That's my favorite spot there. So just love that location. And number 3, yet another international mystery. They are all international ones here. Tomb of the Lost Queen. That setting in Egypt, also very unique. We don't really get any other desert setting games. And just the magnificence of the tomb that we go into. So love it. So those are in order as far as preference goes. And now a favorite room. That's almost a misleading title because sometimes it's more of a space, particular area. And it's not necessarily going to be from one of the favorite locations I've mentioned, and it's actually not in this case. It is from Alibi and Ashes. It is the Drew's Upstairs Landing. I just love that space. It feels so comfortable. I want my own house and I want it to look like this. I love this book nook, if you want to call it that. I love that it's circular in shape. It just feels very warm and inviting. And then the window seat too. I always have wanted a window seat. It's so cozy, and it's got all these cushions there already. You're ready to open a book and sort of half sit, half lie there and just go into to a fantasy world. So I love this space. I mean, the whole Drew house is fantastic, but this, without question, is my favorite room from these 10 games. So, nearly done. We're talking about endings. So my favorite endings, and this is looking at a few different things about the endings, which I'll explain as I go through them. So let's start with the first one, Warnings at Waverly Academy. I mean, this game just is going to keep coming up. I mean, we're at the end, basically, but I love this ending. Tracking down who our culprit is, but also how we figure out how to get through the furnace, and the actual encounter with Corrine, I think, is really great. Again, she's not unnerved. She's very calm, and she listens to Nancy. It's like she's having a very comfortable conversation with a peer. And then she has this glimmer in her eyes when she snatches the book and runs and tries to escape. I think it's so, I don't know, it's just enthralling. As a person, I find Corrine fascinating. And then, of course, my favorite moment is that scene in Mel's room. So that's part of the ending, which just tickles me. It's so good. So this is absolutely one of my favorite endings, not just from these 10 games, but from the entire series. Next, Shadow at the Water's Edge. There are things about it I don't like, but I mean, I love that giant puzzle, that nonogram that we have to solve. I think that's just great. I love that it comes back around from these little puzzle pages that we got from Rentaro early on. And then we have our terrifying moment, which I won't go into detail about at the moment. I don't like the confrontation with Takai. I just don't think that was necessary, and it's not believable. What I do like is when we finally track down Rentaro, we get a choice on how we wrap things up. We don't get that very often, and that is why this ending stands out. It's not so much all the other stuff, but it's because of that additional autonomy that we as a player get, where we choose if we're going to let him break the news to Miwako, or if we're doing it for him. If he's doing it or if we're doing it. I don't remember which way I said it, but yeah, that ability to make a choice is great. Third one is the Deadly Device. Oh, I just love this game. But how we have Victor come in toward the end. He's not right at the end, but his presence is added. And then working with Ryan, just this collaboration, this team effort to distract him as Nancy continues to snoop and search for Nico's hidden office. I love that, and this the additional bits about having your own Faraday cage you need to make, and then having our confrontation with Victor and being in the Faraday cage and having to deal with that schematic. It is a difficult puzzle, but I actually really like it once you understand how to do it. I think it's great. I mean, the actual full-on ending is very dangerous. I don't like that part of it, but I like that we get Victor coming in and, again, that collaboration with Ryan and continuing to find this hidden space. I just think that's great. And then finally, Ghost of Thornton Hall. So this is similar with Shadow at the Water's Edge in terms of having that choice to make. It's in many ways a very simple ending, like you're putting together a wagon, and then redoing the clocks and having this confrontation with Clara. But for me, again, it's about having not just one choice, but two. Choices come up twice about, saving people, making the right choice. And to me, that's the way I look at it. Others might disagree. But yeah, are you helping out people who need help? So yeah, favorite endings. So the last thing before my special topic, just my favorite memories from these games. I'm going to try and zip through these. So Wardens of Waverly Academy, I had taken a break from the message board. I think I was also not modding at the time. But I just remember getting this game for Christmas and then signing in and chatting with the mods, sort of doing a check-in after this hiatus. That was really nice. And I just also being very excited about this game and playing it on Christmas. Trail of the Twister, great soundtrack, but terrible tasks. I hate the activities and really lackluster areas to visit. I just found like they weren't perfected. There's something about the artistry. Things just looked very drawn and unfinished, even though they were finished. I don't know. They just didn't quite look like they did in other games. And same thing actually with the cover art. I just thought of pencil crayons. I don't know if that makes sense, but to me it just looks like someone was playing with pencil crayons, and a lot of things just didn't feel done. Shadow of the Water's Edge, swallowing my screen late at night. So the first time I played this game, I was playing downstairs, and so we finished that giant nonogram, and then we have our encounter with the robotic ghost, and being so startled by this, and this was, 1 a.m. or so, and I was about to scream because I was so startled, but then my brain went, oh no, there's a bedroom above me, there's someone sleeping, if I scream I'm going to freak them out, so I cannot scream, so I had to swallow my scream, and then nearly choked. So then had to not suffocate myself. So that is a really big thing that stands out for me with Shadow of the Water's Edge, was that moment. And then of course it has an amazing soundtrack. Captive Curse, I started playing the beta version of this game and then went overseas. I went on holiday with my mom to Europe, and I remember wondering how the game was going to continue. So quite often in hotel rooms at the end of the day, thinking to myself, I wonder how much more of the game I have left to play. I wonder what's next. Where's this going to go? So thinking about that while I was away. For Alibi and Ashes, really being astounded by the graphics for Tony. She seems so realistic. They really stood out, and I know other people have made that comment as well. So that is a big memory. And then, of course, for me being disappointed with The Culprit, because I know the book so well, The Culprit doesn't make any sense to me. Still don't like it. So those are my big memories for that game. For Tomb of the Lost Queen, just the apartment I was living in and getting the game and playing it and really being drawn in by all the color of the tomb. So again, this is a game that has really stood out as far as how it was created and really brought to life with its artistry. For Deadly Device, really unexpectedly loving the game. As I've said before, I did not expect it to be a good game. I thought it was going to be horrible. But I was so wrong. That soundtrack starts off, brought me in. It is superb. And then the rest of the game, same thing. Absolutely love it. Ghost of Thornton Hall, having very mixed feelings by having this other dark game so soon after some other ones. But also really enjoying parts of it, like the puzzles. And just sort of that storyline and the graphics as well. I think of Clara really standing out. So having mixed feelings, but enjoying it nonetheless. Silent Spy, truly hating the game. That is all I need to say about that one. And Shattered Medallion, really being disappointed by Sunny June. He was interesting as a character, but to me he should not have been named Sunny June. If he hadn't been named Sunny June, wasn't supposed to be that character who we'd had all these little clues about for many games, I would have enjoyed him more. But to me, he didn't fit Sunny June. He didn't fit the character we were sort of led to from previous games. And really the lack of educational elements, because we do learn some things, but to me not enough. I think there could have been so much more culture and language and just history about New Zealand that we could have learned. And we get a little bit of the vocabulary, but we don't, and something about plants and sheep, but you don't really learn about New Zealand in this game. So I thought that was a missed opportunity. And then finally, leaving Her Interactive's moderator team for the final time. I haven't gone back. I'm not going to be going back. But really parting ways with the company after what to me was a very disappointing game. So those are my main memories, my favorite memories from these games. So without further ado, our special topic. This is story adaptations. And I'm going to try and run through this quickly because we're already over an hour. And that's what these recaps videos are. They're usually an hour and some. So yeah, I'm going to be talking about how Her Interactive has adapted novels to the games and how this has changed over time. So all of the Nancy Drew adventure games, and I'm specifying adventure games here not just because that's what I talk about in these recaps, but the dossiers don't actually count. They are not based off of titles. So the adventure series are said to be based off of Nancy Drew stories, and these can come from any of the series: hardbacks, paperbacks, case files, Hardy Boys, Super Mysteries, Girl Detective, Diaries. We haven't actually seen that yet. It can come from any of those books, and how closely a game follows its source material has really changed over the years, and it's been a noticeable change. So let's first talk about where the stories are really the same, and the very first game is a great example of this. Her Interactive followed its source material, same title, Secrets Can Kill, very well. They made a few adaptations. So for the book Jake is Alive, the game, he's dead, and he does get murdered in the book. Her Interactive just cut out the parts where he's alive, where he's Nancy's prime suspect before death. But otherwise, they stuck very closely to that storyline. Same with game number 2, Stay Tuned for Danger. Few things were changed, but primarily you're sticking very closely to the storyline. You've got the same characters, and that was another big thing with these first 6 games, 5 to 6. The characters are about pretty much the same. The titles are pretty much the same. Storyline, plot, the events. Her Interactive stuck really closely. Message in Haunted Mansion, another good example of this. There is a little bit of change because that book takes place in a bunch of other places, not just the manor, but ultimately, same characters, same storyline. Treasure in the Royal Tower, same deal. Final Scene, same deal. Big change there is who gets kidnapped. In the book, it's meant to be Bess. Her Interactive changed that because we weren't seeing Nancy's 2 best friends, so they changed that to Maya. And then Secret of the Scarlet Hand, this is a little bit more change, but sort of the same storyline. Some of the characters, their roles have sort of swapped, same positions, but the names have just taken place, each other's place. So Her Interactive initially was really following their source material to a T. They were making changes where it was necessary and appropriate, but they weren't changing their base story. And those are some of my favorite games. I love the ones where they've really stuck to what the book's told. So after games 5 and 6, they change a little bit. The stories, we're going to say, are similar. The games are similar to the novels, or they've improved the story. So that is why I have The Curse of Blackmore Manor as my picture here. This is a very strange book. It just is, and I know I'm not the only person to think that. And this is a case where Her Interactive followed parts of the story. They cut a bunch out, but they've really improved it as well. And it's not the first time we're seeing this. To me, this first started with Ghost Dogs of Moon Lake. That is the first game that's based off of 2 stories, so they're having to adapt things a little bit differently. So they're taking elements from 2 stories and not being able to tell the full story of either. But ultimately, the main parts, the core of both stories are told. So that's why I'm saying Ghost Dogs of Moon Lake, very similar. It's not exactly the same because they have to cut out a whole lot, but it is similar and you're getting the same idea from it. Same with the Haunted Carousel. There are a bunch of changes, some additional characters who are cut out of the game because he needed to, but ultimately the same plot. And then, yes, of course, Curse of Blackmore Manor. Danger on Deception Island, similar things. Some same characters, but part of the storyline is different. Like the focus is more on kayaking. That's what Katie Firestone does, is she's a kayaker. That's sort of her primary role, and that's why Nancy and her friends are there. Secret of Shadow Ranch really, really closely follows. The only reason I say it's not the same story is because there's a whole second story that is not included in the game. But again, for these first 10 games and beyond, I'm going to throw in Secret of the Old Clock, Last Train to Blue Moon Canyon, Danger by Design, Ransom of the Seven Ships, Warnings at Waverly Academy, and even Alibi and Ashes. They're all very similar. A lot of the same events. The main plot is followed, and for most of those, even the characters are the same. Less so with the later games like Ransom of the Seven Ships, Warnings at Waverly Academy, Alibi and Ashes, different characters, but ultimately you're following a similar storyline and maybe making improvements to better tell the story where appropriate. But this doesn't last. There's a noticeable shift in the stories, and this really starts, in my opinion, with The Creature of Kapu Cave, where we are not really following the storyline. It is very different. So the book really focuses on surfing. Nancy and her friends are visiting an old friend of theirs who's moved to Maui and is involved in a surfing competition and are sort of more involved in that world. Now, there is some of that in Creature of Kapu Cave, but that is all with Frank and Joe. Nancy, who is our protagonist, she is who we are for the most part of this game, who we're playing as. Her focus is on bugs and plants and this curse. I mean, the curse is maybe more of the Hardy Boys, but she's not focused on surfing. So this, for me, is when things really started to shift, both in terms of our storyline, what the focal point is, and how much her interactive is taking from the book, but also characters. This is where we're starting to see a lot of the character names change, and we're not seeing the overlap so much. We also see this with White Wolf of Icicle Creek. I think this is a great example. That game is set in mountainous area, and they are concerned about this wolf that they have and its puppies, which are basically kidnapped, for lack of a better word. The game, we don't have that. It's set in Alberta, both in sort of wolf country. That's where we do have some similarity, but one's Canada, one's the US. But our main story is these accidents that are human caused by someone who's, it's a ridiculous storyline. Basically just looking for an element. They're looking for, was it uranium or something? I don't remember, because I don't care enough. And there's a wolf that appears whenever there are accidents, but that's the extent of the wolf connection. This was a great opportunity for her interactive to tell a story about the wolves and Yellowstone National Park, and they didn't do it. I think that would have been a fascinating story, and that would have followed the book much more closely, but they didn't do that. So again, here's where we're seeing more of that shift, taking some details, but not a lot, and our characters have changed as well. Same thing with Legend of the Crystal Skull, both set in Mardi Gras. There's this overlap with some family stuff in a painting, but that's about it, taking very small details. I don't think there are any characters who are the same between those two stories. Phantom of Venice, same title, both set in Venice, and a little thing about art. That is it. So again, things have shifted. Trail of the Twister, a little bit more closely follows, but again, still a very different storyline. The Deadly Device, Shattered Medallion, and I suspect Labyrinth of Lies as well. I'll be reading the book that it's based off of soon, but based on my understanding, there's some overlap about art smuggling, but that's about it. They're not the same. So following that, no true adaptations. This is not the first instance. I've got the Captive Witness and the Captive Curse here, but this is the set that really stands out the most to me. This is where her interactives made a claim that their game is based off of a book, and there are no similarities, or there's very little similarity. The Captive Curse and Captive Witness, they're both set in Europe. That's it, guys. That is it. The plots are completely different, and this isn't actually the first time we see this. The first example of this is actually in The Haunting of Castle Malloy. Both games take place in Ireland, both stories take place in Ireland. The book is about a bicycle tour. You don't have any of that in the game. The game is all about a missing groom. That's it. So that is not a true adaptation. That game is not based off of that book. You could put any book set in Ireland in that case, or any book. This would even be better, it'd be more realistic or more similar, as if they'd picked a book where a groom actually goes missing. But yeah, nothing as far as the storyline's the same. Shadow of the Water's Edge. Love that game. It is not like the book. Only similarity, Japan and the Hardy Boys. Actually, no, the Hardy Boys aren't even in the game. So, no, just Japan. Then this one, of course, I have already explained, Captive Curse. Tomb of the Lost Queen. Also, same location. They're both set in Egypt. Storylines, not remotely similar. Ghost of Thornton Hall. A little bit about American Civil War. That's it for overlap. Silent Spy. Both set in Scotland. There's a little bit about family, but terrorism plot from the game, that is not from the book. And I presume the same goes for Sea of Darkness and Midnight in Salem. I have to read those books yet. But we do see the shift. It's very noticeable, and there's not a lot of back and forth. So things really changed, and to me the quality of the games changed with these shifts. I thought the better games are the ones that most closely follow their source material. Others may disagree, and it's not to say none of the ones with no true adaptation aren't any good. I mean, again, I love the Deadly Device. Tomb of the Lost Queen, not my favorite, but I do find it interesting, and it's sort of middle ranked. But then again, there's also the Silent Spy, and I hate that game. So, yeah, for me, quality is also tied into this shift for the most part. So really, to summarize, as Her Interactive's team changed and they continued to establish their product, these stories, and became a little bit more autonomous, their games followed less and less of their source material to eventually share little more than the protagonist, and quite often the location. So that's where we see a lot of change is in how the stories are adapted or supposedly adapted. And I'm going to end the special topic there. So that is it. Those are the 10 games I got to talk about in this recap. A reminder again, those are Warnings at Waverly Academy, Trail of the Twister, Shout Out the Water's Edge, The Captive Curse, Alibi and Ashes, Tomb of the Lost Queen, The Deadly Device, Ghost of Thornton Hall, The Silent Spy, and The Shattered Medallion. Whew, that's a lot to talk about. I mean, this has been an hour and 15 minutes. This is a long, long recap. There's a lot to say. And I love talking about these games. Even if I don't necessarily like the game as a whole, there's usually something I can pick out. The exception to that is The Silent Spy. I just don't have anything good to say about that game. I'm sorry. But otherwise, I really like talking about the things that I enjoy. I think it's important to be positive, and just share our appreciation. They might be different from player to player or fan to fan, but I like being able to talk about these and reminisce. I think that's so important, and if you're doing it in a healthy way, there's nothing wrong with that. So thank you all very much for watching or listening to this recap video for Nancy Drew Adventure Games 21 through 30. I've had a lot of fun with this, and I look forward to getting back to my playthroughs. Coming up next will be Labyrinth of Lies. Have a wonderful day, everybody. Thanks again for watching. Bye-bye.